support over the last 2 days. Just your energy, your feedback, the opportunity for us to co-learn from you is something that we are especially appreciative of. As Juliet mentioned, also thank you to my wonderful colleagues for the work that you have done, not only these last 2 days, but really over the last 6 months in preparing for these 2 days. I really appreciate you, and it's just an honor to work with you. So I would like to say this, for many of us, the last 2 days we've been revived, right? Because if truth be told, sometimes it feels as though when we're in our own spaces, we are the only ones doing this work, right? And even though we're all doing good work, if truth be told, we get tired, we get weary, we get frustrated. We're just tired of having to deal with colleagues who don't get it, or even within our own spaces, systems of oppression. So we all need it to be revived. But after the revival, we have work to do. So I'm appreciative of Dr. Heather Bennett this morning, who started us off with our keynote address, really letting us know that equity has to be at the foundation. And we're talking about true equity. True equity has to be at the foundation of everything that we do. But let's also not lose sight of the students. And during her talk, and particularly that image, she reminded us that the work that we're doing, right, it's not just for research, it's not just to attract more individuals into the profession or into our programs, but at the core, it is about the students and the communities that we're all fortunate to serve. But then not only that, when we shifted to our policy agenda with the phenomenal panelists, I want to borrow language from the Honorable Vincent Hughes, where he says, we cannot miss this moment, right? We cannot miss this moment, meaning that in this moment, we have to make sure that we are taking advantage of all of the opportunities. Not only that, we have to make sure that we are on the forefront of these conversations. And anytime there are grants or monies being allocated, we have to make sure that we're taking advantage and that we're also holding those individuals accountable to do the things that they say that they're going to do. But then Dr. Sandra Dungy-Glenn also let us know that there are hopes of building a closer relationship. So that's important for all of us. I never forget years ago, Juliet, where I was really doing this work. I was passionate, but a mentor of mine said this: you're doing great work at the micro level, but now you also have to do some work at the macro level, really challenging me about the importance of policies. At that point, I didn't get it. I found it offensive, but now I really get it. So for all of us, we have to understand that we're coming together, not only just to have great workshops or to hear from phenomenal keynote speakers, or just to, pretty much encourage one another. At the end of the day, we also have to influence policy, and we have to make sure that we are cognizant that, about everything that is being discussed behind closed doors. But I also want us to understand, and this is coming from that particular panelist, Senator Vincent Hughes. He used language about advocates. I want to tag Dr. Bettina Love into the conversation and say this: we also need co-conspirators. We need individuals that are using their positions of privilege, and they're going to make sure that they are action-oriented, not just talking, but you have to do something about it. Then we had phenomenal panelists: David Lapp, Saxon Nelson, Sharif El-Mekki. So much to really gather from that rich discourse. But the one thing that I think that was important, and I believe it was Sharif who really pointed it out, is that this is not a new conversation, nor is it a new phenomenon, right? So if we're starting from the perspective of this happened yesterday, I want to challenge all of us in a good way. We have to make sure that we are thoroughly educated on this particular issue, right? There's some textbooks out there that can help us. One is titled First Class: The Legacy of Dunbar, which it gives a phenomenal overview of this high school, and particularly the narrative of before Brown versus the Board of Education and everything that happened after. So that's a great book. Also very recent, Fugitive Pedagogy by Dr. Jarvis Givens up at Harvard University, a phenomenal book. So I think they let us know, A, that phenomenal teaching has been happening within some of the spaces that oftentimes we're talking about. But then I think that there are some cultural nuances that we also can glean. And then, as I just said, there are some policy implications too. So great concurrent sessions. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to jump into all of them, but kudos to my colleagues at Arcadia University, where they're really talking about, if we're going to be true to this work, and I've heard this several times too within the last 2 days, particularly within the space of teacher education preparation programs. I would even argue our educational leadership programs. We have to make sure that we have faculty and staff within those programs that are thoroughly educated, that are going to do the self-work, that really understands the literature, and that they're going to be committed. So I appreciate the work at Arcadia University, where they talked about some of the challenges that they're dealing with, some of the opportunities, but then also, their aspirations. So that work is near and dear to my heart because we're fighting the same good fight at Cabrini University, where we realize we cannot talk about educational diversity without first dealing with some of the things that we need to deal with within the School of Education, and also within our various programs vis-a-vis our teacher educational prep program. So here's some marching orders I want to give to you. I think that this is a good segue before I pass the baton to my colleague Kizzy, is that Dr. Laura Roy yesterday, she started us off by asking us about our why, right? We have to wrestle with what is our why. But I want to take it a step further in terms of, once we identify our why, what is our willingness, right? What is our willingness to stay engaged? This is not easy work. As mentioned, many of us, we're in our own spaces and we feel as though we are, pretty much our own department. We're the only one championing these causes. It's a sacrifice. But if we're truly committed to having different conversations in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 to 20 years, then we all have to not just talk about it, but we have to be willing to do something, even if it's uncomfortable and even if we're targeted. So Frederick Douglass says this: without struggle, there can never be progress. So colleagues, yes, we've been revived. Obviously, we're excited. But then I also want to challenge us that there will be struggles. They're going to continue to be struggles. We see what's happening at the national level, at the state level, around CRT, around equity, around social justice. I had to leave today because we had that conversation even within Cabrini. Can we teach certain courses? What about our doc students that are using language within their dissertation? So this is a struggle that we have, but let's embrace it, because if we all come together, continue to encourage one another, eventually there will be progress. So once again, I thank you for everything that you have really shared over these last 2 days. And at this moment, I'm going to pass the baton to Kizzy. Thank you.
And while Kizzy's getting set up, I have dropped the Mentimeter link in the chat. And so please log on to that, answer that question in the Mentimeter. It says one idea that was sparked and one shift that I want to make is, so please engage with us on Mentimeter. Kizzy.
Thank you so much, Ron and Donna Marie. I will gladly take that baton because it is a marathon for sure. I want to share my screen to just issue our call for action. So I think today and over the last 2 days, we were hit with a lot of data, right? Some data that really showed us where we are right now in Pennsylvania in terms of educated diversity. Realistically, and looking at this, the nation is 2.5 ratio in terms of teachers and representatives for students. We are really lagging behind in Pennsylvania. We're at 5.9. Ouch. Not good, not good, not good. Then we look at the map of Pennsylvania in terms of teacher diversity. And that stark reality as well in terms of what was presented earlier really opens our eyes that this work is very important in terms of what we need to do. More data, right? Because I like to be a data decision. I like data to drive the decisions that I need to make in my roles and even with my family, which sometimes drives them a little bit nuts, but that's okay. Look at some of these graphics that's showing us where we are in Pennsylvania and why this work is so important. So in terms of a call to action, right? Over the last 2 days, I've heard a lot of verbs. I've heard a lot of action words that I want to put back out there. And there have been a lot of folks that, grassroots organizations, PEDC started as a grassroots organization, and there are others out there who are already involved in this work. We've heard about the support that PACT is going to be able to lend to this. We've had representatives from Railmen Teach. We've had folks from NAACP Education Action Committee, the Pulitzer Center, Friends at Fend. And then we learned about new things over the last two days. Detracking, how we might be able to grow our own. Equity is a big part of what we need to do in terms of the foundations for this. And I really like that graphic that Dr. Bennett was able to share with us that showed that the students are at the top of this. This is why we're doing this work, right? In order for us, our students to be successful. Connections and collaborate. Policy, stick and stay. Dr. Ron just told us about accomplices and why we need to turn our whys into willingness, right? Because it's one thing to know what the problem is, but we all need to roll up our sleeves now and be a part of the solution. It is this moment, but we need to turn the moment into a movement. Some recommendations were made along the way, from our student voices, as well as from our educators and from the information and all the share outs in the chat. And I just wanted to remind folks again, what are some of the seamless things that we can start doing now? They're not hard things at all, right? Our school districts need to create a welcoming environment. We need to be able to showcase diversity within our schools as a means of attracting more BIPOC teachers. Pay equity, right? Our teachers teacher salary, it's not an attractive position to get into. And today we heard that it could be identified as a high occupancy career. We need to be able to create a mentorship pipeline or infuse mentorship into that. In our session today, that we dived into the mentorship toolkit, we talked about mentorship being able to fill some of that leaky, some of those gaps that we're seeing along the way. Policy and administrative regulations. All of us can influence policy as well as administrative regulations. And we don't necessarily need that to first happen at the state level. What can we do now within our own context to change some practices that might influence policy locally and even at that bigger level, right? Encourage and check on each other. And, a big part of what we presented this over the last 2 days had to do with our culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies. Those were shared out. Take a look at them, review them. How can you begin to implement them in your own context, right? You don't need to necessarily wait for something big to happen. Let's start, sometimes we need to start with small steps. PEDC is already involved in this work, and we have invited folks to be a part of this with us. There are many things that we're doing and that we will continue to do. The website has been shared with folks many, many times over the last 2 days. I want to emphasize that it is a way to find out how you can get engaged with this work and how you can become a part of our network. We need to connect and collaborate. When we're thinking about building this big picture, right? In one of the breakout sessions that I was a part of today, we talked about some of these efforts most definitely being siloed, right? But it is in terms of all of those silos coming together within this network because sometimes we can't wait for others to show us what that big picture is, right? We all have a piece of the puzzle. Let's get together and put it together in our networks, and we can create that big picture for ourselves. We need you, right? And we need each other. Again, I want to thank everyone for being a part of our summit, and I want to throw this back to Juliet.